Well. G2 Esports. Your time in the North American Rocket League scene has come to an end. 8 incredible years of not just participating, but becoming the staple name in the RLCS. Despite being based in Germany, you set up shop in NA, and truth be told, your legacy is that of being arguably the most interesting character Rocket League Esports has ever seen. The club has gone through many iterations and arcs, yet has never felt undeserving of the spotlight. At no point was G2 Esports and Rocket League ever boring to talk about, so let's talk about them. Because if we're being honest, in the beginning, you guys sucked. That disastrous Season 2 roster is forgotten nowadays, but it's so fascinating if you take a half glance at it. What do you mean you signed the world champions with D. Kronovi and you were only capable of placing 7th in an A? Trust me, if you knew the Season 1 competition level, you'd think at worst G2 would sleepwalk their way to at least top 6 in the world the next season. Not missing top 6 in 2016 level North America. That Blunder year only added to the hype and expectation of the first rebuild with J-Nups and Rizzo. For many, this is where the story really begins, and with that, a pretty intense increase in fandom that formed one of the core pillars of fan engagement for many viewers. For some, this was the roster that made them fall in love with the esport, with lovable personalities and a patent to execute delightful passing plays. For others, well, let's just say, that big fandom that was built was in equal parts admirable as it was irritating. Guys, when does G2 play? When does G2 play? When does G2 play? Well, not the Season 3 World Championship. Where was G2 then? Oh right, you lost 3-0 to NRG and 3-1 to Genesis in the final week of league play to squander your automatic LAN qualification, and then somehow lost to Denial in the playoffs. Yes, that's the series where Sad Jr. clutched in overtime on keyboard and mouse. Respectfully, when the team and its fanbase carried themselves like they were an elite squad while collapses like that happened, that's objectively funny. However, while they were rightly the butt of many jokes and memes in the community for a minute, their failed qualification for Season 3 Worlds only strengthened the fan investment in this team, and they stuck throughout. With hindsight, their resolve was actually quite admirable, when many better teams and even orgs have disintegrated for far less disastrous results. Maybe I'm protecting my own personal feelings here, but slowly, even the cynics of G2 could recognize that they had suffered enough, and they could get behind them turning it around. At this point, they were the defiant underdogs, and who doesn't love an underdog story? RLCS Season 4 for G2 can be defined by one single league play match. Week 5 versus Ghost Gaming. This may sound crazy in hindsight, but Ghost in Season 4 was a proper quality squad, and automatic LAN qualification came down to this fated encounter. For G2, it was a bit absurd it had come down to this, given they had vanquished both Cloud9 and NRG in the regular season. But for those fleeting moments of brilliance, there was a random ass loss to FlyQuest that would undo all their great work. Combined with the PTSD from last season's playoffs disaster, and even though G2 had multiple chances, this one match versus Ghost felt like such a must win. But it was here where the legend of your Canadian superstar really took shape. I don't say this phrase often because I believe it's seldom true in pro play. So no, I don't mince words when I say J-Naps hard carried G2 in that match and led the boys to qualification for Season 4's World Championship. That one series of unrivaled brilliance, it flicked the switch for G2 and propelled them to dizzying heights for the next 6 months. All of a sudden, the world's most anti-clutch team started producing in the big moments. In basically every match in Season 4 Worlds, they were at best 50-50 odds. often unfancied, yet regularly victorious. OC Superstars Chiefs? Close, but no cigar for the Australians. Rocket League Esports featuring Prime Fairy Peak? Swat it away. Breakout Stars PSG Esports? No problem. The end result was 4th place, and it took both Gale Force and Cloud9 to send G2 packing. But honour had finally been brought to the club, and the best was yet to come. The E-League Cup, the most prestigious non-RLCS LAN of all time, arguably on par with an RLCS major, only invited the best of the best, the world's top 8 teams. Heavy favourites were Gale Force Esports, having started their dynasty at the previous World Championship. No one could topple them at this stage, especially not G2, right? Well, with Cronovi and Rizzo stepping up to not make G2 a one-man army, they actually freaking did it, and ended 2017 as major LAN champions. G2 had done it. They had reached the summit, and as 2018 arrived, it looked like the boys were here to stay. A shaky run throughout DreamHack Leipzig still saw them reach the grand finals, where JDubs infamously, yet deservedly, won the MVP award despite not winning the LAN. And for as game-changing and meta-defining as Justin moving to NRG was, come the Season 5 North American Championship, G2 was the #1 seed in NA. But when you're on top, the only way is down. And the most fascinating characters are often those who are flawed. And respectfully, G2 was often that, in spite of their brilliance. The game they played had a high ceiling, but it was so difficult to execute. Ultra aggressive turn-man pushes seeking infield passes seldom got punished domestically, but when it didn't click, the wheels will fall off the wagon very quickly, especially on the international stage. Yes, being a consistent top threat on paper throughout 2018 was commendable, but not winning a single series at RLCS LANs that year was not. Complexity, evil geniuses, flipside tactics, and PSG Sports banished the Cronovi era of G2 to the Shadow Realm. To the dismay of all their fans, it was over. They couldn't even defend their E-League title at the end of 2018, as they were simply not even good enough to qualify. Something had to change. It's just, how you went about making that change really rubbed people the wrong way. Moving on from Cronovi is one thing. That's a professional decision. But you mean to tell me he only learned of this from another manager? Fan outrage was understandably at an all-time high. It was so messy, Rizzo literally had to go onto Reddit to write a clarification. With hindsight, it arguably makes the legacy of the now beloved JDubs, Rizzo, and Chicago roster a little bit more confusing. 2019 was perhaps one of the more brilliant, yet frustrating years for G2. Chicago did bring another gear to the squad, no doubt about that, but with him came even higher expectations that were ever so slightly out of reach. Their moments of sheer brilliance are cruelly defined by the fact that it was just never first place. And the multiple, and I mean multiple, remarkably poor results just meant the G2 discourse, fandom, and discourse of said fandom all the more fascinating. For the genuinely top tier gameplay shown at the Season 7 World Championship and DreamHack Montreal, where G2 notched up impressive, truly merited Grand Finals appearances, they would also go to DreamHack Dallas and Valencia and not even make the top 8, or more shockingly, drop down to the promotion relegation tournament in RLCS Season 8. It's not like the pieces or performance wasn't there. JDubs was still a top 10 player in the world throughout these peaks and valleys. But at the same time, it was a team that played in such an unsustainable manner that was impossible to recreate consistently given their pieces. It was ultimately ironic that throughout 2019, Chicago made the team perform objectively better than with Crenovi, but the results were objectively worse. It was almost like they hadn't learned anything. Maybe their moment would have been April 2020, when they actually took over North America, remarkably recovering from the prior season's embarrassment and dumpstering the entire field. But alas, COVID ruined everything. There would be no chance for JNAPS, Chicago, and Rizzo in their best ever form as a trio to play internationally. That blow hurts so much, the fact I would automatically christen them as World Champions-elect of 2020 even now will rile people up. That is how highly regarded G2 was in the spring of 2020. Regardless, the world of RL Esports entered the online era, and G2's arc throughout the pandemic is a fascinating, self-contained story. No one could have known in Season 9 the woes, misfortune, and drama that would befall them. G2 in RLCS X had top team billing without top team results. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Only this time, it was in a region that had grown well beyond its Big 3 limitations. There were now many capable squads contending for regional titles. Tier 1 victories were at a premium, and G2 was not getting close to glory. Even the G2 diehards could recognize the silliness of trying to claim a grid victory as anything noteworthy. The reality is this period was the result of rapid development of NA talent. The very talent which had condemned G2 to relegation in Season 8. And while they managed to get one last laugh with victory in Season 9, time is undefeated, and the game moved past them very fast, very quickly. Energy's players had better mechanics, the SSG trio had better ball control, Team Envy mastered passing plays, hell, Rogue had a superior hard carry when push came to shove. Yet once again, G2 was a good team, but they were gatekept from greatness by a playstyle slightly past the capability of their beloved pieces. Top 4 in NA slipped to top 6, then top 8, and then results dipped outside the top 8, and into the abyss. The trio of JDAPS, Rizzo, and Chicago had overstayed its welcome. However, they would not pull the trigger in kicking someone unless it was for an elite talent. Just, elite talents were not attracted to a team that was flat out struggling. So, in a form of self-sacrifice you could say, Rizzo stepped aside. Not just from G2, but for competing overall, as to allow G2 to move on to bigger and better teams. His selflessness will not be for... Okay. I can't exaggerate this for dramatic effect. Rizzo did want to retire for like a year at that point, but he still stuck it out with the boys for as long as he could. But let's be real, if you saw how happy he was, you'd swear it was the best decision of his life. And this is a dude, an actual Rocket League player who's gotten married. Regardless, the door opened for young substitute Reeves to enter the Lions Den. And as it turned out, all JDAPS and Chicago needed to rediscover their best form was a fresh start. Just like that, G2 had their swagger back. The big wins were flowing, they started reclimbing the ranks of NA at its most competitive and restored honor and prestige to the G2 name. They made it to the grand finals of the NA Spring Major, and top 4 at the North American Championships, both times only falling to eventual champions NRG. But it was those losses at the final hurdle that began to be their Achilles heel as RLCS 21-22 started. See, G2, without much drama, would qualify for the fall major, but it was getting close to 2 years without an NA regional victory. And this hit home more than ever with the Haunted Titles Cup, where after an undefeated run to the finals, and going up 1-0 in the best of set grand finals versus NRG, the old bad habits returned. Their playstyle got hard countered, and NRG condemned them to second place yet again. That silver medal hurt a lot. It was beginning to be a question of not when G2 would be on top again, but if it would ever happen again. The Fall Classic 2 weeks later offered another chance, and again, throughout the initial stages of the event, G2 was without peer. Again, they were in the grand finals, only this time, opposite of them was Team Envy. Again, in the best of 7 finals, they eked out a 1-0 lead after the first best of 7. Only this time, they carried the form into the second best of 7. It seems this would finally be G2's time.
Naps, maybe A. Oh, J-Naps almost put that one through. The top right shot. Oh, it was all the way in. And Atomic turned it away.
Oh, how ironic it is with hindsight that Atomic would be the one to deny G2 with only pixels as a margin. Inevitably, Team Envy won that overtime. Game 7 of the second series would also go to OT. G2 would be within 1 goal of glory again, but they would still lose, and all their progress was reset. And well, in the final best of 7, Team Envy raced to an unassailable 3-1 lead. For the umpteenth time, second place for G2 seemed all but certain. But in a moment of sheer inspiration, G2 would finally break through. In what would ultimately be one last send-off to their high-pressure, ultra-aggressive philosophy at its dominating best, they locked Envy in their own half for the next 3 games, to the point where come game 21 out of 21, Envy could only register a single shot, as G2 actually won a regional. After 596 days, G2 was finally back on top. And though the Stockholm Major was a mini disaster, it gave G2 the confidence to push on into 2022, where at long last, they would truly evolve and become a machine. The first sign that showed this new G2 had learned from previous experiences was their controversial decision to make an actually aggressive roster move. Dries was out, Atomic was in. Now how potentially bad this could have been was blown way out of proportion, but some level of concern was understandable. After all, G2 had finally found the winning formula with Dries after nearly 2 barren years, and they were already moving on from it. Well, all concerns were very quickly quieted, as throughout the rest of RLCS 21-22, to the joy of most fans, G2 played some genuinely beautiful Rocket League. The other indication G2 had finally evolved was how Atomic slotted into the roster. Don't get me wrong, the G2 identity full of passing plays and aggressive pushes was still present, but they didn't just force pressure through a barrage of shots anymore. Atomic as first man was a literal game changer, and often he was undefendable. His arsenal of mechanical options kept opponents guessing on whether they had to defend an infield pass or a solo play. All the while, when Atomic replaced the outgoing passive Dries, J-Naps fit further back into the rotation, played a lot deeper, and to the surprise of many fans, operated as a capable last man for G2, who not only didn't give up free goals, but was also often in the right spot to finish off G2's offensive pushes with his trademark shooting. This gives Chicago full freedom to play effective offense to his heart's content, and man, G2 looked almost untouchable. The 2 online splits combined for 3 regional titles, and almost a perfect online split if not for FaZe's Game 7 overtime heroics. However, the crowning achievement came at the 2022 Winter Major. G2, for all their accolades, had never won an RLCS LAN. But once they sent Furia and Space Station down to lowers and they made the grand finals, all that opposed them were these kids called Team Queso. Yes, determined to write their own story, Queso's lower bracket run for the ages somehow stole the headlines from Rocket League's darling team. The kids looked primed to deny G2 of their own destiny, and well, when Chicago and Atomic straight up choked in the dying embers of the first best of 7 and allowed Queso to reset the bracket, there seemed to be no way back. It would take moments of magic and inspiration for G2 to get over the line. Cue Wasteland Night. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 consecutive touches, followed by a pre-jump dunk. That is what it took to turn the tides towards G2, and they never looked back.
Finally! G2 are your winter major champions!
For my money, Los Angeles was probably the most cathartic victory in G2's history, and one of the most memorable W's in all of RL Esports, given it was the first time with crowds post-COVID right on home soil for G2. The disappointment of the World Championship second place doesn't take away from it. On that day, Atomic was the best player in the world. Chicago finally had a LAN victory, and JNAPS was at long last an RLCS LAN champion. Following up on those incredible highs proved to be difficult for G2 in RLCS 22-23. They were a good team, but just that, a good team. They didn't really threaten global domination, but that was okay. Disappointing for sure. The Rotterdam Major 0-3 loss to Power in the context of that season still confuses everyone. But for a club with such boisterous support, unlike certain other teams, they didn't demand the spotlight when they didn't warrant it. There was no generational crash out from the G2 army like you'd expect. When faced with adversity, the boys just put their best foot forward. The lows of missing top 8 in fall and not even qualifying for the spring major were vastly outweighed by very commendable 5th to 8th placings at both the winter major and the world championship. And in the ultimate sign that G2 as a club had learnt their lessons from past experiences, they knew when a project had ran its course. The KCX showmatch victory over Carmine Corp was the last act of JNAPS, Chicago and Atomic as a trio. And it was a fitting conclusion. They weren't overstaying their welcome, but they also weren't being dumped unceremoniously. Unlike prior editions of G2, they got to go out with dignity. Above all else, their run throughout 2022 and 2023 was widely celebrated. As for everything G2 had given to RL Esports fans, given the extraordinarily high standards, it always felt like they were ever so slightly lacking a squad worthy of the G2 billing. JNAPS, Atomic and Chicago changed that, and they were a team G2 could be truly proud to call their own club legends, immortalized until the end of time. So imagine the reaction if G2 managed to construct a squad as good as those Winter Major champions, but equally as contentious in the fans' eyes as the Cordovi Rizzo days. In 2024, that actually happened, and it was glorious. Now obviously, as this has been recorded in late 2024, Atomic, Beast Mode and Daniel are still together as a team, with no indication of any player changes. But regardless of where their new home may be, their 2024 run on G2 Esports made them the defining team in all of Rocket League. The leader of the cast wasn't just one individual superhero, but a trio of Rocket League's Avengers, uniting not just trying to put G2 back on top, but the entirety of North America. This roster had the expectation of the world on it, which was quite controversial given the newly acquired Dan Mode duo had in their most recent outing made history as one of the biggest failures ever under version 1 when they couldn't even qualify for lands at NA's weakest ever point. You mean to tell me that is being hyped up as the slayers of Zen in France? Pfft, they'll struggle to be number 1 in their own region given that new Gen G super team with first killer.
Domination! They will not be stopped!
Alright. Good going, fair enough. But can they do it on land versus the French?
It's right, it's open! G2! Are gonna take it!
Yeah, this was the NA super team, and then some. Was the Discourse and G2 army utterly intolerable? Yes. Did that attract equally irrational haters? Oh yes it did. And it was butt ugly. But the reality is G2 was so damn good, they ultimately justified and vindicated even their most obnoxious supporters. No, not teammates. Some of you guys need to shut up. Come Split 2, if we're being honest, if we're not purely for being a North American team, G2 would have been viewed as the clear best team in the world for a far longer period than what immediately surrounded the London 3.0 major. There was no asterisks, no format cheese, even if some newer, less informed speakers tried to argue otherwise. The new G2 ascended the ranks with rapid efficiency, and flat out was the best team in the game for most of 2024. And no matter where you side on the region debate, you have to respect that. You don't make literally every grand final in the season for nothing. And even then, by every metric, it took the already high status of what JDMs in Chicago built and pole vaulted it to the point this 3-man roster with Satyu behind them already has conversations about where it ranks among the greatest teams of all time. Their floor in 2024 was second place at worst, so it's undeniable that G2 true merit was the main attraction throughout the entire year. And you know what? In a way, it's quite fitting that that's where G2's story ends. Because they're going out the way they always were and always have been, and that's as the main character of Rocket League Esports. From signing the game's first ever world champions and building up one of the game's most popular fan bases, to repeatedly bouncing back from disaster and growing with the times to deliver some of the best teams in recent memory, unlike other clubs who may have won more or secured bigger accolades, what G2 has over everyone else is they were never boring. You always had to keep an eye on them, and that was always justified. Their relevancy was never forced at any point over the past 8 years. So, as you've watched, there was quite a lot to say about G2 and Rocket League. But hey, that's what happens when you're the longest standing, most iconic organization in Rocket League history. Godspeed, thanks for the memories.